Okay. We are live and we will allow some people to enter the room. They are seeing our screen. All right. So here we are. Good evening, Facebook land. We are here tonight. A long-awaited discussion on my part, and I am so delighted to have two of my dear friends joining me from Boston and from Birmingham. So we have Ron Carter. Say hey, Ron. Hi.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Yes, and we have Karin Wall in Boston. Yes.
Hello.
All right now. So I want to share with you, first of all, guys, what brings me here, what brings us here. And so do me a favor as you come into the room, please go ahead and like the broadcast, but also just share it. We want as many persons to be part of this dialogue tonight. I think it's going to be provocative, informative, challenging. Yeah, lots of things I believe are going to happen because we are going to be real. I think the two friends I have around the table with me are people who walk that walk and are willing to just be honest about what the thought process is and be willing to share that with us. So I hope you're open for an honest dialogue tonight on racial awareness. I want to begin by telling you what is the impetus for this dialogue tonight. So I am from the Caribbean. I'm from the beautiful island of Antigua and Barbuda in the Eastern Caribbean. And I came to America in my 20s. That is some 30 years ago. And I don't want to speak for all Caribbean people, nor all West Indians, right? But I think for the average West Indian, when we leave our homeland, when we leave our native country and we come to America, or we go to Canada or England, which are the three places we would travel to, we are focused on, we're going either for education, we're going either for economics, sometimes both. And we disregard, honestly, the culture even sometimes, or understanding the people, or knowing about the people that we're gonna live among and work among and so forth. And so I have found that it took the murder of George Floyd last year. It took the uprising that happened in America last year. It took the riots, it took the conversations, it took the outrage for me personally to be awakened. And I realize I can't go back to sleep. I don't want to go back to sleep. My eyes have been open to what has been happening for centuries. And I knew it intellectually, but I don't know that I allowed myself to sit with my brothers and sisters and really understand some of the things that they have walked through and why they're so sensitive into things that perhaps as a Caribbean person, I am not, or less. But the truth be told, as I'm doing this journey more intentionally, to be honest, I realize I have my own trauma and I have my own situation because we were colonized and we were made to believe a certain thing about ourselves and about those who were over us. So, hey, tonight is a night of speaking the truth and taking the mask off and just coming to bear on issues that I feel have been neglected. And so if you haven't heard about racial trauma before, if you haven't heard about what this can do generations later, if you haven't heard about trauma, period, understand trauma, how you can be traumatized and yet be triggered, decades later, especially when the trauma keeps reoccurring, which is what has happened in terms of racism here in America. My friends, get your coffee, get your tea, make sure you are comfortable because, and we want you engaged. So, please comment, and I'm going to try to look at my device and see anybody's question. And if we can answer, we will do that. But get engaged with us tonight. So I'm going to turn to my friends and ask them both to kind of share a little bit of themselves, with our audience, and also to tap into their own journey, their own, the environment in which they grew up as a Black person here, as an African American here. So Ron, let's go first with you. And you are needing to unmute yourself as you do that.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Because I'm a Southerner, my Southern etiquette is telling me I need to let Karin go first because that's the way my Southern mother raised me.
All
so
right.
I'm going to mute myself and allow Karin to go first because that's how my mom would have it. So,
all right, bro.
Karin.
That's good. I told you guys you won't get honesty in the room. Here we go.
You are so funny. I love you though. Thank you. So I, as you can hear, and as Ron has already mentioned, he grew up, he's a Southerner. I am a dyed-in-the-wool Northerner. Grew up in New York, parts of Long Island, parts of Queens. And my mother, her family, grew up in Long Island. And then my grandmother on my mom's side, my grandmother on my mom's side, their family came from South Carolina. On my father's side, it was North Carolina. So, there was Southern sensibilities that I just kind of picked up by being raised by those folks, but very much, influenced by the Northern kind of experience. And I don't know this to be true, but from what I've heard, people think that Northerners can be pretty edgy. So, just kind of straight to the point. And, they also think we're bad drivers, which is just like absurd. But,
I don't drive up north, so just let me tell you that for that reason.
So, my experience is a lot of different things. Let me try to make it succinct. So, as you can see, I'm a light-skinned African American, and that brings with it its own story, because there's a whole history attached to how, one from whose ancestors were from the African diaspora turned out to be as light as I am. Body type, hair texture, everything that goes along with that. And if you were, I would say, a light-skinned child, when I was growing up, you heard certain things about yourself, mostly positive things that kind of pitch you against your brothers and sisters that didn't look like you. Like phrases like, when you get married, don't bring anything dark in here, that kind of stuff. You heard it, and as a child, you just, okay, or people might say to me, "Ooh, you're gonna make some pretty babies," and they were all only talking about my complexion. That's what they were talking about, Now, I would say that it wasn't until I went away to college and actually got to graduate school where I was doing a dual program in social work and African American studies that the light began to dawn on, for me. I realized it was the first time I had ever been taught any kind of African American history. And I was, 24? So think of all the unlearning I had to do, just to kind of get to an even place, to a balanced place. But I will say that I feel like that combination saved my life because it informed who I am as a clinician, because back then everything was a deficit model, and so here I would hear about how dysfunctional we were as people of African descent in my social work classes. And then I'd run across the street, to the other program and be in a course and hear about our greatness, and our resilience and our contributions to literature and music and dance and science. So it was a great balance for me, but it was an awakening for me. And I'm so glad I had it. Although I consider it late, I'm so glad I had it relatively young, because then I was able to make different decisions as an adult, and it also informed how we, meaning my husband and I, chose to raise our kids and the things that we chose to emphasize and the way we attempted to prepare them. I will say it's a burden to
Mhm.
live in this society because there's not a day when people say like, oh, it's everything isn't about race. Oh, contraire, it is. It absolutely is. Some of you just get the luxury of not having to deal with that on a daily basis because you may not have privilege. You may not think you have privilege, but your complexion is not something that's a hindrance to you.
Mm.
So
Wow. That's good. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. But
you're welcome.
could you also help us understand a little bit more of what you do? You mentioned the word I'm a clinician. So tell the folks,
Oh,
yeah, we
so
need to know a little bit about
um,
you.
right. So I've been a clinician, a social worker, 30 something years, and it is been within the last 15 years, I would say, that I've really honed in on what I like to do. And
Mhm.
that is just try to improve the quality of life of people if I can help them, with and supporting their mental health. And what I came to learn, excuse me, as I was doing that with children, like, preschoolers, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, adults, males, females, as I was doing that, I began to see how much of the stressors connected to, say, poor mental health or certain diagnoses was absolutely connected to the racist bubble that we live within.
Mhm.
So, but I mean, I love doing it, and I will, I'll fight the fight until I close my eyes.
Yeah.
Um, and the other piece of what I do is train interns,
Mm.
and whether they know it or not, you know, they're going to be woke, right, or out of the profession. um, and it's from all backgrounds. I enjoy challenging,
Yeah.
what they're learning in class with the reality, like, with COVID. Just I'll say this quickly with COVID, early on, people kind of just didn't know what to do, and people wanted to quit internships, and I was like, absolutely not,
Mhm.
because this is probably the first and possibly only time that you will come close enough to your clients to understand what they feel like on a daily basis,
Mm.
with uncertainty, with
Mhm.
food shortages,
Mhm.
with unexpected unemployment,
Mhm.
with evictions, um, with dealing with their children on a 24-hour basis. No, 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 no. We're going to learn through this. We're going to figure out our own stuff, and then we're going to figure out, wow, that's what my clients feel like.
Mhm.
I'm going to come out of COVID, and go on with my life. But my clients will still have some of those same issues, the
Mhm.
same unemployment, the same, lack of access to healthcare, etc. I mean, the same, look at how the pandemic has impacted poor neighborhoods in school districts.
Mhm.
Some of these rich folks, they just developed little mini private schools and pods, and went into homeschooling. For the most part, we couldn't do that.
Right.
So our kids were either learning virtually or not learning for a whole year.
Yeah.
And that's all due to this construct.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a good word, construct. And I think the word systemic, connects there where we don't understand. When racism is systemic, it affects everything, right? So thank you for sharing a little bit more of yourself with us,
You're
Karin. But
welcome.
I want my audience to also know that you talk about you were told not to bring home a dark skinned person, but you not only brought home a dark skinned person, you brought home a what? uh, someone from a West Indian.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Bruce is, yeah,
Your
Bruce's
husband's is his
lineage.
heritage is Jamaican, yeah?
His mom was Jamaican, and his dad was Cape Verdean.
Okay, okay.
So
All right. All right, brother. Ron, your turn to tell us about yourself and kind of like how,
Yeah.
where you grew up and how you were affected.
Well, great. As I stated earlier, I am as Karen would say, she was a die in the wood northerner. I'm a die in the wool southerner. I have lived in Alabama all my life, save 3 years that I spent living up north in Michigan. I have spent the bulk of my adult life living in Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I reside right now. But but I was privileged to have been reared in Tuskegee, Alabama, and I say privileged because at least in my mind, Tuskegee was unique in many respects, and what I mean by that is from the time I was from first grade all the way through the 12th grade, I could count on one hand the number of non-African American teachers I had. So, and I could go even further to say that I probably only had that personally that I only had maybe two. So from first grade all the way through high school, I basically had about two white teachers. All of my other teachers were African American. Um, Tuskegee was unique in that it was a black enclave of black middle class sensibilities. Now, well, I can say obviously, I wasn't one of those. I was kind of on the lower economic strata, but I went to school with kids whose parents were doctors, lawyers, professors, who worked at the VA hospital. We had a VA hospital there. We had two two hospitals in addition to the VA, and Black people worked there. I grew up in the shadows of Tuskegee Institute that later became Tuskegee University, and the legacy of Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and again growing up there, seeing Black people run stuff, run the city, run the school board,
Hmm.
all the doctors, lawyers in the city were African American, and these were my classmates' parents that I got to interact with. The first swimming pool in a private home that I swam in was one of my classmates' swimming pool who were Black. My father was a dean at Tuskegee University. Mother was an attorney. I went to school with the sons of Fred Gray, who litigated the Tuskegee syphilis case. So,
Mm.
so Tuskegee for me was a was an embodiment of Black history. So, whereas Karen said that it took her until she was in her 20s, Black history was a part of my life from day one.
Mm.
I lived and breathed Black history.
Mm.
So, to kind of quote Jesse Jackson, I had a strong sense of somebodyness at a very early age. I knew Black history because we
Mhm.
didn't need a Black History Month because Black history was all around us. Everywhere
Mhm.
we went, Black history was a
Mhm.
part of us, and our teachers instilled this sense of ethnic
Mhm.
pride in us, and so we were ingrained in that you come from a great people. So so in that respect, again, I said I was very privileged to have grown up and nurtured in Tuskegee because of the legacy of the city, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, the legacy again of Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, the legacy of the Commodores and Tom Joyner and all these people
Mm.
who cut their teeth on in and around that city, and to be living in the South and also being shaped by all the other HBCUs, or the
That's
historical
right.
Black colleges and universities that are here, um, gave you again this sense of achievement, that you can accomplish, that you are somebody. And so, and what that did, it prepared me when I left high school to enter into what you might call the PWI, the predominantly white institutions, or predominantly white ways of life. So when I left knowing who I was. My ethnic identity was intact. Now that didn't mean it didn't get assaulted prior to that, but when I left Tuskegee and started, you know, my professional life, the lessons that I learned were ingrained in me about who I was as an African American and an African American male in particular. So that's kind of a little bit about my background and where I came from, and I'm deeply grateful to God for it. I always thank God for the
For
privilege
being
of
a
being
Southerner.
for being a Southerner and being and being more in particular being a son of Tuskegee. That I can't thank God enough for that.
And
I
I'm
can just
go ahead.
piggyback on something Ron said. That resonates with me. When I was in social work school, one of my classmates had been raised in Chesapeake, Virginia. And one day we were at a social work conference, a Black social worker conference, and we were standing on the balcony in this hotel, and it was just Black people as far as the eye could see. And I turned to her and I just said, "Isn't this amazing? Like all these Black people." And she looks at me and she was like, "No." I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said what you just said. She said, "Karin, I was raised in this. It never occurred to me that a white person would have the nerve to think they were better than me."
Right, exactly.
She said that just was like that just
That was
never occurred
foreign
to
to
me.
me. Yeah, that was
That
foreign to
I
me.
didn't she said I didn't have white teachers until I came up here. So we had the reverse kind of,
Right.
situation. But I will never forget that. Like that was such a mind blower, like, wait a minute, what?
Which,
But
by the way, explains why you could be born here, raised here, and your responses are different
mhm, mhm.
because
Hmm.
of your backstories and how
Yep,
you were raised, right?
yep,
And I've
yep,
seen that
yep.
because I do have connections with people who like they speak like some white people do or some people from other countries would in terms of how some African Americans respond to the violence and to the situation. I'm thinking I would think they would feel the same way, but somehow they're detached even.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, it's like they're far removed from the trauma, which the truth be told, how do we do that? How do we separate ourselves? Perhaps that's part of the trauma, right? Perhaps
Yeah.
that's part of the design of what's
Mhm,
supposed to happen,
mhm.
that we,
Yeah.
instead of us being together, feeling together, sharing together, and understanding that we're all in the same journey, we are fragmented as a people.
I mean, when we think of trauma in the mental health framework, one of the indicators is that person like not wanting to relive it, not wanting to be around anything that reminds them of it, to get as far away from it as possible. So just take that and,
Wow,
enlarge that.
that's good. That's good.
Um,
Good.
like, okay, I can educate myself out of this. I can finance my way out of this. I can liposuction whatever it is, I can weave my way out of this. I can do all those things to put distance between me
Yeah.
and that reality, because that's not me. Yeah.
That is so good right there, Karen. Wow. So just like with any other trauma, I can either run from it or I can face it, confront it, right? And if I have to confront it, I'm gonna have to deal with the pain of it,
Hmm.
right? And work through the journey of what healing should look like, right? But it makes me want to ask us a question. It's like, what exactly is racial trauma? We know we have a sense of what trauma is, but what's racial trauma? And I don't know who wants to jump in first and kind of, or even why is it essential?
We're gonna let the clinician go first.
That's what I said. She didn't know she was going to be in the hot seat. Come on.
Hey,
What do you think
she,
this is?
yeah, we're gonna let the clinician go first. I'll just piggyback on the clinician.
Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome.
And by the way, guys, I don't know if you feel this, but you're like you're coming into our living rooms and you're part of a conversation or we're having, you notice how we're just having a conversation?
Yeah, we're just having a good
That's
time.
it's intentional. So come on in, come on into the room.
I'm sorry, Sandra, can you repeat that question? Because I wasn't prepared to.
Help us understand, first of all, what trauma is and why is it so essential for us to understand racial trauma? Give us some background insight about trauma on a whole, not, and then connect that now to racial trauma. Because we need to understand why there's such a sensitivity to race, to racism, to the things that African Americans go through. And some of us don't really understand that because we don't know trauma. We don't understand trauma and we don't understand historical ancestral trauma.
So I would say trauma can look any number of ways. You know, what you can be doing. I've been doing, and I've had intakes where I'll ask a client why they're there. I'll ask if there's any trauma in their background, and I'll get to the definition in a minute. I'll ask, is there any trauma in their background? And they'll be like, no, no,
Okay.
nothing that I can remember. And then proceed to tell me how they were raped. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. What? If they don't acknowledge it, I mean, I know when I hear it and you understand behaviors that have come out of it, but if they haven't made that connection, um, so I use it as an example to say that trauma is really uh, any situation or occurrence in your life that sends your brain to start sending the signals that we're under attack. We need to get the adrenaline going. We may have to run, we may have to freeze, we may have to hide, whatever it is. So for you it might be a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody else it might be witnessing a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
um for you, for somebody else it could be neighborhood trauma. If you live in a an area that is a high impact area for like gang violence, you don't have to be involved in the gang violence. Your family's not involved in the gang violence. You've never witnessed anything, but it's all around you. You hear gunshots at night. Never been shot, and are on a completely different trajectory for life. But you have been traumatized. Your body takes that in, it absorbs it, and it's almost don't laugh when I give you this example. Sometimes I think about trauma getting stuck in our bodies like cholesterol. You
Wow.
have to do something to get it unstuck.
Wow.
Once you start to build up that plaque in your
Mm.
system, it is going to eventually cut off the blood supply,
Wow.
you know,
Absolutely.
and you've got to, you got to like dislodge it,
Mm-hmm.
and get things moving.
Wow. Wow. Because the body remembers.
Oh gosh.
The body
Yeah.
remembers.
We know so much more about that now than we did even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Wow.
And then racial trauma. I mean, everybody knows about the the what is it, a landmark book? I guess it would be called a landmark book. Post traumatic slave syndrome, which 25, 30 years ago, people would have laughed you out of a room
Hmm.
if you mentioned post traumatic slave syndrome, because one, we didn't know enough about trauma. Two, we weren't dealing with systemic racism the way we are now. So you didn't have those two elements, but now it's undeniable that trauma is in the DNA of most Black people.
Mm-hmm.
We have adapted and adjusted um, to life as a way of being resilient and as a way of getting through, and sometimes even making great contributions to your family, to your community, to the world. Um, but we still live within this construct, and money doesn't get you out of it, and education doesn't get you out of it, and complexion doesn't get you out of it. At the end of the day, you're Black, and we live in a society that has made rules that weren't meant to protect us. They weren't written with us in mind. All men are created equal. They weren't talking about us, right? So the laws, the system works against us constantly. Um, I was just quickly, I was on a call last night on black male mental health. And one of the things was, I was so thrilled to see young Black male clinicians. I didn't know what to do with myself. I wanted to kiss them, right? Um, and one of the things that they talked about was like waking up. No matter how good your day is, you can be pretty sure that this system that wasn't created with you in mind, norms that were established with not with you in mind,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to bump up against that pretty much on a daily basis. And one of the things that they said that they think is powerful, this young, they were like 30 something, probably 35ish, were saying that the more we bear witness to each other's um, suffering and the reality of it,
Mhm.
and stop waiting for white people to affirm it for us,
Wow.
to acknowledge it, to say, yes, that's trauma. I don't need your permission to tell me it's trauma. I know that. And if we as a collective begin to acknowledge that, and that's where, when I say collective, I mean the larger collective.
Mhm.
You don't have to have experienced what I've experienced or what my people have experienced to to accept, to acknowledge, to validate
Mm.
my experience. It hurts more when someone who looks like you dismisses or minimizes your experience.
Wow. Yes,
Ron?
I am feeling something in this moment. I want to acknowledge because this is exactly what brought me to this table. Because the truth be told, I felt like I was one of those people who did not identify, did not take the time to understand, did not educate myself, did not learn anything enough for me to understand why is it the African Americans respond to certain things the way they do. And I feel all kinds of things right now in this moment, Karin, because I think that's key. It's like after George Floyd's murder, all of a sudden I want to be part of the suffering. I want to identify with the suffering. I want to feel what y'all are feeling. And so I've been crying with you since then. I mean, whereas I wasn't before. I have been vocal like I've never been before. And which is why for me, doing this live broadcast was important as well, because I felt like it's important that I do my part in saying, listen, as a as an immigrant from the Caribbean, Black immigrant from the Caribbean, I have honestly, in some ways, like detached myself from the suffering of my brothers and sisters here in America. And for that, I'm telling you, I've repented, and I want to publicly, all of you watching, I am repenting publicly and say, please forgive my ignorance. But I have been enlightened, to be honest with you, and I realize that the system, I think that's what I became awakened to, is that the system was designed in a way to oppress the African American. It was designed. So when I come here and I can understand, why aren't they further ahead? They didn't have to fight to get green card. They didn't have to do all kinds of things to gain status in America. They were born here, their parents here. How come they're struggling so? It didn't make sense to me, but now it does, because I understand that everything is designed to keep them out. Everything, the housing system, the educational, everything. And it's like, until you start understanding systemic racism, you would continue to judge, you continue to
Yeah.
stand in judgment of what you don't know.
Yeah. Can I add just a little bit of Karen talking about and to your question of why understanding uh, this idea of understanding why racial trauma is so essential. Number one, simply because it's real. It's a reality that is that's born in the bodies of African American people. Number two, you need to understand it. It's essential for us to understand it because of the long-term impact it has had on not only the mental health of Black people, but also the physiological health of Black people. And I'm talking generationally. This is not just, because what tends to happen is that this stuff gets passed down from generation to generation. And so the trauma that my parents experienced got passed down to me. And to a certain degree now I have acquired certain skills and things like that, and a follower of Jesus and all that stuff like that. But as Pete Scazzaro reminds us, we may have Jesus in our heart, but grandpa is in our bones. And we have to deal with that reality of what's inside of us and how that trauma gets passed down to the next generation. And again, and the impact it has on the mental health of Black people. And in some cases, as Karen pointed out, the damage that it does, and so that it ends up rewiring the way we process and think, and why we respond the way we do to certain things that happen, and why people don't understand it, they don't get it. It's kind of like a person who's just coming back from a war. Like my uncle went to Vietnam, and I watched things that would trigger him, things that would remind him of things back when he was in Vietnam. And we have a lot more sympathy, and we should have sympathy for folks who went to war. I have Vietnam veterans in my church, and they'll tell you there's certain things that trigger them, that remind them of the trauma of what they went through that never goes away. And it has impacted their loved ones as well. Their loved ones is called collateral damage. Now their loved ones have to dealing with the after effects and the the after effects of them coming back from the war and having to process and live through that. And so you talk about the impact that this has not only on the person but also everybody that person is connected to. And so when you think about hundreds of years of being traumatized, I remember, just to give an example, I remember, I don't remember this show I was watching, but it was one of those those shows that dealt with some of the issues that Black and whites have had. And I remember a scene where this grandfather was standing watching a parade with his grandson, and they had gotten ice cream. And this white gentleman went up to him and basically called him a boy and denigrated him in front of his grandson. And so the image of him standing stone faced, looking at that, holding on to his grandson's arm or hand, and you could see he was gritting his teeth like this. And then all of a sudden, the camera panned from his face down to his hand, and he was holding the ice cream, and you could just see all of his anger transferred down to that ice cream cone, and he was squeezing the cone so tight that the ice cream was just running all over his hand. And his grandson looked down and saw that, and it spoke volume. Now, can you imagine what the grandson is interpreting from that? And his grandfather never said a word.
Right.
Never said a word.
Wow.
And so that trauma, the grandfather was absorbing it, but now the grandson is also absorbing it by watching that event. And what was being communicated is, you don't say anything. You just stand here and take it.
That's right.
You stand here and take it. So it's really important for us to understand this reality because of the devastating impact that it has had and continues to have on people. The long-term well-being and mental health of African Americans is a serious issue that and why we need to understand that. And I think if you are a non-African American, if you are Black from the Caribbean, come to this country, understanding this also helps you to not be a perpetuator of it. For you not to be one who is, you help perpetuate this unwittingly. And whether you do it wittingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, the effect is still the same.
Exactly.
Because if we people get re-traumatized by all of this because of your ignorance and not being aware of this. So I just wanted to just add that, or I think why it's so important to understand that understanding this is so important.
Yes. I want to speak to the impact of trauma and how even when it's not directly your story, how when you connect, or like the child who saw the grandfather squeezing the ice cream. Not in 2019, I went to Rwanda, and I made the error of visiting the genocide memorial the day I was traveling out of Rwanda. Of course, I cried because they didn't censor anything. It was raw, it was real. And for months, I came back to America and I was unwell and I couldn't figure out what it was. My body reacted because now I had experienced vicarious trauma. And so imagine when you have experienced it directly, or you have observed it, or vicariously experienced it, whether watching a movie, watching a show, and you're seeing that stuff. As a matter of fact, when I was in Ghana on the same trip, I went to Ghana first, and when I went to the castle, and Can I just confess to everybody? I literally said, I understand why some Black folks hate white people. That's what I said.
No.
That's what Apostle Valentine removed. I kid you not. That's
Yeah.
what I said. I'm like, oh my gosh. And right now I'm saying it and my body's reacting because I remember, especially when having heard all that they had been through, and there was this door of no return.
Yep.
I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth. Yeah, there's been trauma.
Yeah.
And I
Uh,
think,
Sandra, if I could, I gotta interject in here. I think for and going back to why again is essential. I think for African Americans in this country is that we live in a perpetual. What did you call it? The
Door of
something.
no return.
Yeah, we live in a perpetual door of no return.
wow.
Hmm.
We're constantly reminded again that there's no return. That you're just constantly ongoing, 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 ongoing. Um, Marion Wright Edelman, who was the former, she was the former leader of the
Children's Defense Fund.
Children's Defense Fund or Child Welfare League. She was
Hmm.
in all of them. Well, she wrote a book years ago that she dedicated to her sons. And in the preface or the introduction of the book, I forget which part it was, but one of the things that she made this statement that really just gripped me. And the statement was, and I quote, "It is absolutely exhausting being African American in this country."
Hmm.
And only person who could now a person who has not walked in the shoes of an African American in this country would probably look at that and dismiss it as being hyperbole, as a
Hmm.
gross exaggeration. What are you talking about? This is the land of the free, home of the brave, it's land of opportunity, and yada yada yada. Well, as a Black man, I understood it. I get it
Right.
because you are constantly having to interpret things.
Right.
Something
Constantly.
constantly interpreting things. You get on an elevator and someone, they may clutch a purse here, or they may make a phrase or say some things, and then you're like, oh, okay, okay. Do I want to deal with this, or do I not want to say
Hmm.
anything? And so by the time you go through the process of wondering or saying, should I not? And the emotional energy that you go through by the time you like, man, I'm just spent. I'm tired.
Right.
I'm
Absolutely.
emotionally spent. I'm wasted
Absolutely.
because I'm constantly trying to, you constantly navigating through this space of wondering what that person said. What was that,
Was I imagining that?
yeah, did I imagine it?
Yeah.
Did she really say that?
Hmm.
What did I just feel? Did I just felt something?
Hmm.
And other folk may not feel that, but if you've lived here and you've had to negotiate living here and the contours of living in America, you understand that reality that you constantly have this grid in your head where you're
Yep.
constantly interpreting actions and non-actions, and you're constantly having to equip the next generation to say this
Hmm.
is how you navigate this space, and
Hmm.
you gotta and constantly, well, why we can't go here, why we
Right.
can't do, well, you just can't.
Hmm.
So you know what I'm thinking here now, clinician Karen? Wait a minute. If when traumatized, right, you have the opportunity to deal with your trauma, to work through your trauma, and become aware of your triggers, and so you can figure out how to work through that. But when it is continuous, when there's this door of no return, when there's like it's like the trauma, you're traumatized and you're re-traumatized, almost like you have a wound that gets picked again, picked again, picked again. What is that also doing to our wholeness, our wellness? No wonder perhaps the kinds of diseases that you find that we have to deal with, and then the system that doesn't help us get the best of care because we can't afford it, all that. I mean, help us understand what the damage that's been done, even physically, because I think this is way
Where do you
too.
want me to start? Migraines, high blood pressure,
Oh,
Yes, it's
diabetes.
called stress on steroids.
Yeah.
Stress on
Obesity.
steroids. Yeah.
Yeah. We
wow,
alopecia. Hair falling out. Where do you want me to start?
Yep.
wow, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to, you know, add insult to injury, as if we need to, I don't know, have you guys heard of this All of Us project? It's a nationwide project on precision medicine. No,
No,
it's
not
all
heard
over.
of it.
It's all over the country, and they're excuse me, they're up here in Boston, and so we've one of the organizations that I'm part of. We've partnered with them. So precision medicine, essentially, and President Obama actually spoke on it. Precision medicine is essentially the future of medicine, where instead of a one size fits all for different, ailments or whatever, um, they're trying to break it down by gender, age, ethnicity. So here's the example that made it real to me. Lisinoprol is a very commonly prescribed medication for high blood pressure, and when you read about the trials and the FDA approval, it was approved and tested on millions of Americans, not one black. So, but yet, if I go in for medicine for high blood pressure, I'm likely to get lisinoprol prescribed for me. And they found that African Americans have had more of a reaction to lisinopril. Well, no wonder. You don't test it on us. You test it on somebody else, apply it to us. So, I mean, and that's kind of what you feel like living in this country. So precision medicine is just an effort to really hone in on, um, that may work for white people, but what's the best medicine given the makeup of this black person? What's the best medicine to prescribe for them? Okay. So, um, I think to answer your question, if I can, again, where do you want me to start in terms of that connection? Um, and I think, um, to add insult to injury is um, the minimizing of our experience that
Mm,
makes it worse.
yeah.
It's like the child
Mhm.
who comes to the family and says, mom's boyfriend has been molesting me, and they tell her she's fast, or that she probably wanted it.
Mhm.
Okay, so now I know never to tell you anything again.
Right.
So, but I still, how do I deal with what's happened to me?
Mhm.
Um, and so, how many times look at COVID? Look at our reaction as a Black community to this vaccine. There's years of centuries of distrust. And this is an unknown thing. Can't nobody can tell you it's not. They hope it doesn't have any long-term effects, and that we don't wake up one day with a third eye. But for now, it's gotten the virus under control, and so that's the way we're moving. But how many times have you hear women say things like, they're in childbirth, and the doctor tells them they're not in that much pain. They're asking for an epidural. No, I've given you enough. You can't be in pain. Now I am. How are you going to tell me what my body is feeling? Well, in the back of their mind somewhere is that notion that Black women were having babies in the cotton fields, dropping the babies and continuing to pick cotton, and that we have a high threshold for pain. So to get your to go through experiences and not have them validated by a system that you have to interface with. Like Ron, growing up in the South, you didn't have to go to a white doctor. So hopefully there was more, understanding about, certain common issues.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
if you've got nowhere else to go, you go into a clinic or, a public hospital or whatever, and usually those are teaching hospitals and they're just there to learn. Yeah, I distrust them. Yeah, I distrust them.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to, and Karen brought this up. I was going to mention this when you talk about one of the present day impacts of
Oh,
trauma.
thank you.
Again, is the connection that she made with COVID and the historical legacy of Tuskegee. And while you're not necessarily dealing with an apples and apples comparison, but that's still that distrust, the historical distrust that has come down where Black men in Tuskegee were used as guinea pigs to carry out, well, we're just going to see how syphilis plays itself out
Mm,
and taken to its natural conclusion so we can gain some scientific research.
mhm.
And it's not the only one. I mean, that was one of the more glaring issues of it, but you have this ongoing, these studies and where people are going in. And so it creates this distrust in the Black community about getting certain meds and things like that. You know, I got aunts and stuff like, I ain't taking no medicine.
Right, right.
I'm not taking nothing that doctor tell me to take.
Mm-hmm.
And in some case, it is born out of their distrust coming down through history,
Mm-hmm.
and that can have a negative impact on them, because when there is medications that are out there that can help bring their health in line to correct some of the pressing health issues that they have, they won't take it because of this historical distrust. So you have this ongoing reality of Black people's lives being cut short because they are dealing with this legacy of trauma and distrust of the system, and how this stuff gets perpetuated. So this stuff is real, which is why what I said, understanding it is real, because it's deadly. And
Right.
to understand the implications of it, that it has real life implications in real time with
Mm-hmm.
real people in cities across America. So that's why this topic about understanding trauma is so vitally important. And then I would say this, and if we are understanding it as it relates to veterans, as it relates to, I have a friend who's doing studies in the subject of a moral injury and the impact that
Mm.
that's having on people. So it stands to reason, in my mind at least, that if we're going to be intellectually honest, that we have to come to terms with the reality that this also is a reality that's impacting a people group, and it has been so for a long time. And so we just need to deal with it and address it.
Yeah,
Wow.
Ron, if I could kind of piggyback off of that, and thinking about what gets passed down, um, think about how we raise our kids. Now, it is evolving somewhat, but every Black child has heard, now when we go in that store, don't you embarrass me. Or, when I say now, I mean right now. When I call you, there better not even be a second between the time I call you and the time you appear in front of me. Um, or, just being quick to shut them down and not allowing them to have like agency over their own body and their emotions. And if you think about it, there's, I'm not saying it's totally connected to this, but there's an element of, there was a time when your child's survival could depend on how quickly they responded to you and did what you told them to do. And that, it may or may not be the case anymore, but in part you understood it as a collective because we were all dealing with that. Now it's a bit more scattered, and there's the no spanking, the timeout folks, the talking to, the this, whatever. But and so some people dismiss spanking or corporal punishment as barbaric, or it breeds violence. You may be correct, but before we're so quick to judge that, let's look at this person's lineage. Let's look at the history that's been passed down to them. A quick, very quick story. I did a broadcast probably about a year ago, and I had a Haitian woman, uh, Cape Verdean American, and I think a Trinidadian, um, on, and we were discussing this kind of thing. And the Cape Verdean woman was probably darker than me, and well, she was darker than me and had kind of kinky curly hair, and sh- she said that her great grandparents came here from Cape Verde, like at the turn of the 20th century. And they came at a time, so they were, light skin ish, right? They came at a time though when, well, it was pre Jim Crow, but they came at a time when it wasn't unusual to see Black men hanging from trees, or they came at a time when the Tulsa race riots were, in full effect. So what this young woman was saying was, so my grandparents, as a means of survival for my father and his family, was to not identify as Black because all they knew is Black boys are being hung.
Mm.
So if we can say you're not Black, that could save your life. Now, two generations further, light skin, green eyes, straight hair, they're acting that out, but they don't know why their grandparents did it in the first place. They're acting it out. They don't want to be called black. They don't want to associate with dark skinned people. They'll talk about your hair in a second. So they're living out their grandparents' fears, but have no idea that there was a reason why they did that then. And it had nothing to do necessarily with prejudice. It was, I need to save your life. We're in a country we don't know the language, don't know the customs, but we do know that little boys look like you are getting hung.
Mm.
So I need you to distinguish yourself
Wow.
from them.
Yeah. Now, hold up, Sandra. Oh, she sparked something else here. And I think we may not get to any other questions tonight because I think this whole racial trauma thing is so, because I'm actually processing from an experiential standpoint the impact this has. And I want to go back to something you said, Sandra. You said when you went to Africa and you stood at the door of no return, and you said you understood how some Black people can hate white people. Well, Black people struggle with that all the time. Truth be told, we struggle with the feeling. And as a Christian, and I'm gonna be honest with you, in my Christian journey, I have struggled trying to reconcile the commands of Jesus and my newfound faith.
Come on.
When they collide with my flesh. When I have had those moments to where I have wanted to hate white people, and I have had those moments where I've been with my white brothers and sisters, and I told them, I've had those feelings where I've hated you because of experiences that I've had. And again, and you're reminded of this. Now, let me give you a personal example of this. I have been to the Holocaust Museum in DC. I have been to the National Civil Rights Museum in Washington, D.C. I have been to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis several times, the Civil Rights Museum here in Birmingham, Alabama. Been to all of them. And every time you go through them, you feel something. You fighting back that. Well, during spring break, my wife has been wanting to visit the Legacy Museum and the Lynching Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. I didn't want to go because I knew what I was going to be feeling and what I was going to be dealing with. Well, we went to the Legacy Museum first. Now, Legacy Museum, I did not know this history in Montgomery, Alabama. We entered into a building which was a slave holding pen. If you went outside and turned left and looked down the street, you would see the Alabama River. And I had no idea that Montgomery, Alabama was an epicenter of the slave trade. And Montgomery, Alabama is about 45 minutes from Tuskegee. And I spent a lot of time in and around it. So slaves were brought off of the ship into the market area, and they were held in these buildings as holding pens where they were marked and sold to the marketplace. And so I'm standing in this building. I had no idea of this history. But then I turned and walked down this incline, and there's kind of like these holograms in little cells where you have these holograms of children and other people who were slaves held there, and they're talking. And I'm like, okay. So I leave there, and then I enter into the museum itself. I just told you all of the museums I've been to. I never had to leave any of them, but I had to leave that one. I walked out. By the time I got to the door, my face was awash in tears. I text my wife and my son. I said, I'm going to the car. I can't take it anymore because I don't like what I'm feeling welling up on the inside of me. And so I'm looking at people as they navigate through that space. I'm like, what are you thinking? And I wonder, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Because I'm looking at, because it's a mixed crowd. You know, there are white people in there, there are Black people in there. And I walked out and I said, I cannot look a white person in the face right now. I can't do it. Just can't do it. And so when I walked out, I told one of the workers, I said, I don't know how you do this every day. Don't know how you do it. And then Sandra, I left. Then we went to the Lynching Museum. And we stood outside at the Lynching Museum, and you saw hundreds upon hundreds of representations at this museum of people, Black and white, Some whites been lynched too because of they're willing to advocate against racial injustice. And you saw, as far as the eye can see, as you walk through all these placards that Brian Stevenson have constructed at the Lynching Museum represented people whose lives were taken as a result of being lynched. And then I'm gonna finish with this. Then you go inside and there's this wall where they've collected dirt, dirt from the foot of trees where bodies were hung and fell to the ground. And some of them weren't even buried. And so they have collected dirt from these places all over the state of Alabama, Georgia, every places. And they've put that as a memorial to recognize that the sacredness of these people's lives. And so to stand there and to behold this and the sight of this, you're fighting against you being re-traumatized all over again. And again, you're fighting against these feelings of, I'm a Christian. I ain't supposed to hate, but I'll keep it 100. It's hard. I'm gonna be honest, it's hard. So I have to come back and just kind of reset myself, but I can't deny the reality of what I see and what I experience. And so when you process all of that, it's real difficult. And I understand it, I get it, why people feel the way they do. I mean,
but
real.
The younger generation of white folks, I've heard them. I haven't done anything. Why would you hate me? Why would you be angry towards me when I didn't do anything?
Sure that's not just the younger generation, Sandra. White folks been saying that since I was a kid.
Okay.
I didn't have slaves, that kind of thing. Why are they mad at me? Okay, but you benefited from it. You still benefit from it.
And what is it we would want of them, though? Because it's like that. I think that's what y'all want. What y'all want? What y'all want from us? What y'all want? What do y'all want? What can we do?
So, as Ron just said, I'm gonna
say it.
I'm gonna be honest about this. What we would, first of all, to see this as an American problem, not a Black problem, would be one thing. Two, the complete, I don't care how uncomfortable it is, the complete rewriting of history to write the truth about our history. Mm-hmm. And three, I would like the next time a Black man is killed by police or whatever due to violence in the community, I would like for there to be a hate crime bill that flies through Congress as fast as the anti-Asian hate group, anti-hate Asian bill did. Are you kidding me? Why is it so easy to see that? Because of the narrative that's been created about Asians being the model minorities, the model immigrants. Different story. And Asians will tell you that's no more true about them being the model, whatever. They will tell you that's no more true about them than ours is about us. But they didn't do the writing, and neither did we. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think more than anything else, I mean, at the top of the list, obviously, is recognition, acknowledge it. I mean, it is what it is. It was, as Karin said, it's American history. Don't sweep it under the rug. It is right there for everybody to see. Don't pretend like it didn't happen. Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously there are other things that we could talk about, but I think more than anything else, I think the thing that keeps jabbing at African Americans, and you have to excuse me if I use Black folk a lot. That's a part of my upbringing. We use the word Black, and so it means the same thing. But I think it's really the recognition, the acknowledgement. It's all because when you acknowledge, it's almost like you validating our humanity. Yes. When you finally admit it, that it's kind of like a person who has been traumatized, and a person is constantly denying that it didn't happen. And finally, you can say, "Okay, I did it." You can't go back and undo everything that was happening. Mm-hmm. We smart enough to know you can't undo all of that, but can you at least acknowledge,
legitimize,
just validate and it is a great signal in that direction.
Hey,
Yeah,
Can
my
you
friend
can you?
is watching from London. It means she's up at what, 3 in the morning, and she's saying it's
Mm-hmm,
not just an American problem.
mm-hmm,
So I want to tell you a story she and I experienced. An experience I had because it hit me harder than it did her. So I had gone to London to celebrate her 50th birthday. Then we flew to Rome to go on this cruise. We were early there, missed the first bus, whatever the story was. So by the time we were supposed to get on the second bus to get to the port, the person was calling the people for the ship, and we got up because we were snoozing on the chair in the airport and trying to listen to this lady. She was walking, I mean, walking fast, and I was flabbergasted. Am I talking to somebody or somebody's acknowledging my presence? And my friend said to me, "This is normal." I'm like, "Normal?" And so I'm thinking, I've been spending some years in America, know about customer service, for example. And so I'm like, I want to speak to somebody about this. So I go up to a desk where it's customer service and I try to explain my my plight. The lady looked at me and said, "Welcome to Italy."
mm-hmm.
And I've never forgotten that story because you're right, my friend. It's not just America. It might be a little bit more subtle in some places, but we do understand that those of you who are watching from other parts of the world, you too have experienced your own form of racism. And I think somebody said earlier, we need more of these kinds of discussions. And I think, to be honest with you, we know that this is a drop in the bucket. And perhaps if my friends are open, we can come back to the table because I do believe there's more to be said. There's more to be addressed, right? And we can only do our part. So I am hoping that many of you would begin to have these kinds of conversations. I know some of you are doing that. Let's continue. And I think if we do what Karin said, is like bear the suffering or bear with the
Oh,
suffering,
bear witness. Mm-hmm.
bear witness, that's it.
Yeah.
Bear witness to the suffering of others. That's what empathy is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I don't have to have walked through what you walked through, but I want to listen. I want to listen to understand. I want to listen to care, right? I want to listen to walk with you in a real way. And I think if we did more of that, we would not be where we are. It's unfortunate that people are not necessarily listening to understand. I'm listening, but I'm not really listening because I
They're
want to
just
tell you why you shouldn't be the way you are.
right. They're listening to defend their point.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
So
exactly. Because they want to maintain their narrative about Black.
right, right. Like
Right.
if I accept your truth, I may have to change. I may have some responsibility. I may have to own some things. And you know what? It's really comfortable from where I sit right now. So do I want to do all of that?
Listen, when I came here 30 years ago, I was fellowshipping at a church pastored by a white person, predominantly white. The family I lived with at the time were going to that church, and other Black families who had just moved from New York came to Florida. That's the church they found. Do you know the pastor eventually resigned, and we suspected because the white folks kept leaving. And I believe he was pressured from headquarters to say,
Mm-hmm.
you can't allow this.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was open, because not all white folks are like that. He was quite open and embracing, but not his congregants. They were like, where y'all going? You ain't belong here. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I am hoping that there's more empathy being stirred up in the hearts of the people, more a validation to the plight, the suffering, the trauma, the pain, the sensitivity, the race card that we like to say, you playing the race card again. I really wanted us to use that term because I know, Karen, when we talked earlier this week, you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that. Don't play the
Don't get
race
me
card.
started.
Everything is not about race. Everything is not black and white. Karen is like, let's wrap this up, Sandra.
I mean, that's a whole, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah,
And it can't be. It's no need to start it now, in my
yeah,
opinion.
I hear you. I hear
Yeah,
But
I hear
yeah,
you.
because I will get going here. Okay.
But
can I just say this
sure, sure.
about the race card? What I don't, my objection to it is, again, that's denying my reality.
Mm,
And you saying that to me is like saying that I get to turn this on or off. And in
Yes.
this moment, it's convenient for me to play the race card. I wish there was no such thing. I mean, I just wish that wasn't an issue. It is, but the other piece is I'm done with you making the rules and having you validate my reality.
Mm,
So you don't get to tell me about the race card.
okay.
You haven't lived it. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
That
Right.
comes from a flawed system.
Right.
You don't get to do that.
Right. Right.
Okay, so she had her chance.
Eh.
I gotta say a little bit, and then we'll be done. We kind of set the table for the next discussion.
There you go. There you go.
But as Karen pointed out, the illustration that Karen just gave is I've seen quote unquote this used in a couple of ways. One, as a shutdown technique,
Mhm,
where it's used in the form of an accusation.
mhm,
So the person who's used quote and said, well, you just playing the race card are basically accusing you
mhm,
of trying to gain an advantage based on your race. And
mhm,
it's a shutdown tactic.
mhm,
What's so interesting about that is that the race card has a long history of being played by those who would try to shut folk down from using it.
mhm,
For example, the race card has gone by different names, some of which may be called race baiting.
mhm,
I live in Alabama, and I'm just using him as an illustration. We have a former governor named is George Wallace.
mm.
George Wallace made a statement that went like this: segregation
Segregation
today,
today.
segregation tomorrow, segregation forever.
Yep.
He was using the race card, and he was using the race card as a strategy, as a political strategy to signal to those whom he wanted to vote for him to gain an advantage in the political atmosphere, in the political arena, to send a word to those who wanted to vote for him. So he was playing the race card and it's a strategy, a political strategy that people use. Another one that was used is we're trying to preserve the Southern way of life. That's playing the race card. Now, it's subtle, it's
Mhm,
not overt, but those to whom he was speaking to understood exactly what he said. And this kind of comes under the category of dog whistle politics and
mhm,
things like
mhm.
that. So you're whistling, you're using these phrases and these words that people who
Mhm.
understood exactly what you're saying. So the race card can be played, and it's generally been played by whites a long time before blacks ever quote unquote start using it. So it's rather disingenuous that you use it all the time. You've been using it. You've been using it as a strategy to stoke fear in the minds of
That's
people,
right.
to say, hey, look, if you want them to go to school with your children, if you
That's
want this
right.
to happen,
Yeah.
then
If you
so
want them to
boom,
rape your women.
boom.
Mhm.
So the race
Yeah.
car has this it has this we'll talk about it later, Sonia.
Yes.
But it
Yes.
has
We're gonna
this
have to do round two on this
Mhm.
conversation here. But as we wrap up tonight, I feel like we want to leave our viewers with a couple of pointers in how to really be a witness to, how to really sit with, how to really walk with, for those who really want to, for those who care. What are some things that they can do?
So one of the things that I would say is it's uncomfortable listening to people's story. Um, and it may not be for everybody, but I don't want to hear how you can't take it when I'm telling you something I lived and all you have to do is hear it.
Wow.
So if you can't do it, you can't do it.
Hmm.
But it's very uncomfortable sometimes sitting like before a breakthrough. Sometimes it's really very difficult. You know, you're backlogged and you're kind of emotionally constipated and all that stuff. But don't rush people through it. As Ron was alluding to earlier, don't tell them they're like, there's an expiration date on your grief or this experience or, that was then, but look at you. You've been able to go to college and you bought a house. I don't minimize my experience because I've been able to do that in spite of.
Hmm.
So um,
That's good.
I think a different posture around listening
Yes.
and um, don't be quick to suspend your right in your brain to start going places. Like Well, the Japanese have made it. The so-and-sos have made it. The West Indians have made it. The Africans. I'm not talking about them right now. They didn't have the experience that my ancestors had. Can you stay right here with me while we talk about this
Mhm.
and deal with your uncomfortability? And
Mhm.
I don't mind. I don't expect you to be comfortable with it because you shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't mind that. But listen,
Mhm.
listen.
Mhm.
Don't start to anecdotally want to tell me stories about, people who came here and earned 3 degrees. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
you need to know they did that in spite of,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
because of.
Mhm. It's good. It's good. Ron?
I would just say, just educate yourself,
Mhm.
uh, go on a journey like you did, learn, being willing to do the hard work of again, not dismissing, but really, really saying that there's got to be something to this. And the best way
Right.
that's the best way to be empathetic is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And the way you do that, you kind of vicariously place yourself, understand the history, being willing to sit, to listen, to learn from others who have had their. I have a good friend of mine who does ministry in a lot of white circles and things like that. And the one thing that he does, he constantly tells them his story,
Mhm.
and his story serves as an entree for them to really begin to appreciate and understand the pain, the agony that his family, the historical legacy that his family lived through. And then it forces them to want to go on this journey of learning. And it's the tragedy of it is that here we are in 2021, and yet you have so many people who don't even understand and know this history, which is kind of a shame. As Karin said, it being history being taught. So you're going to have to go and learn on your own. You're going to have to go do the hard work and sit and study and open yourself up to the uncomfortableness of it all. So to really be empathetic, you gotta feel something. It's got to go from up here down to here. It can't be just cognitive. You got to be able to. And I think that one of the encouraging things you're seeing is that you're seeing that for a lot of whites in our country, things have moved from up here and they're starting to come down here. And I think, with the whole George Floyd thing, you see people in the streets marching, protesting, doing things that we've not seen before. So on one score, that could be that's a plus sign, but you can't rest on that. You got to also go beyond that, because that moment can be fleeting and
Mm-hmm.
you go on to something else. And if you don't do something in the meantime, if you don't take steps in the meantime on on the other side of this traumatic event, then you're going to find yourself perpetuating the same thing over and over again. So you got to be a student. You got to be willing to learn. You got to be willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable position to read, to learn, to ask questions, and to really engage others on their own terms. Now,
Right.
you got to engage people on their terms, not on your terms.
Right.
You got to be willing to put yourself, um, if you want to learn about African Americans, but you got to go to them. You got to be uncomfortable in their space. You got to go and say, hey, I'm willing to come to your church and to sit, or to come to your home. It's not always come over here.
Mm-hmm.
Come over here where you are comfortable being in. So we got to go and do all the negotiating and be on.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. If you're really genuine,
Yeah.
then you will put yourself in an environment like. And Karin, you'll appreciate this. Years ago, I went to a conference where these two social workers who were trying to stymie the they were doing a master's level program, and there were a lot of young white females who were going through the program who would finish, and they were going doing work in Connecticut in the city, and they were dropping like flies, and they were quitting, and so these two African American professors were put on the mandate to say, you guys got to figure out what's going on with this. And so what they did is they began to do some things to help them to understand the lived experience of Black folk before they ever step foot into the world. So what they did is that they took them to church with them as an illustration, as an example. And they said, we want you to feel what it's like to be powerless in someone else's lived experience. So they took them to church, and they had to negotiate that space And how Black folk do church, the call, the response, the singing, the clapping, the shouting, the dancing, because one church was a Methodist and the other one was a Pentecostal church. And so they said, well, we Black folk do this all the time. We're always in spaces where we are the only one. And so they wanted them to understand what it felt like. So if you're going to be on this journey, you got to understand what it feels like for African Americans in this country. And so you got to step into that space. And so, Sandra, I just want to commend you. I really want to commend you for stepping into this, to acknowledging where you are in all of this and the awareness that you have now, because I think the Lord is going to really use you to be a blessing in this. And so thank you for inviting us to this table. I appreciate it.
Thank you for.
And Ron and I will be getting that book list and movie list to you.
Yes.
Okay, we got to tell the people what that is about. Okay, so before we came live, they are asking, have you seen this? Have you seen? I'm like, no. So I'm like, homework here, assignment. You got to watch these movies. You got to see these documentaries because that's part of the education.
Part of the education.
So yes, send me the list and I'm on board. And I want to invite my Caribbean, West Indian, African immigrants to really get on this journey as well. Let us acknowledge that we have contributed to the problem. We have been part of the problem by honestly being judgmental and critical, not understanding racial trauma, not understanding systemic racism, and didn't know what we didn't know. So.
Oh, Sandra, don't leave out the Afro-Latinas, okay? That's a whole nother.
Okay. Listen, can you guys tell that we have so much to talk about? Would you guys promise to do this again with me?
Absolutely.
All right, because folks are saying, no, we need to have this conversation. So this can't be one off, right? So we will talk and we'll come back to you and we'll tell you when we'll do part 2 of this discussion. But thank you for being here with us. Do us a favor.
Thank you.
Please share this with your friends, and it's going to be ready to be on my my YouTube channel, Sandra Valentine Ministries, and we hope that you will share it. Also, we're going to conclude our 10 days journey in the waiting room leading up into Pentecost. So Sunday, 23rd, Pentecost Sunday, we're going to have a unity service. And I'm so looking forward to that, Karin and Ron, because I believe that God is going to help us to gather intentionally and perhaps even speak in a spiritual way to what I believe is not just a situation, but is demonic, is diabolical, and we need to break some things and see liberation come. Because when you have something that is like, oh, nobody can see and nobody can address and nobody can figure out how to bring, or really the help, that there's something demonic and diabolical about this. And so I meant to have something closer to me to show you guys. I need to grab it. Watch me. So
it's a nice picture of her.
Thank you. I just didn't want to leave it blank, guys. So when I went to Ghana, I bought this, and
it's beautiful.
if you can see what this piece of work is, it's made of wood, but it's all interlocked, and you cannot separate it without breaking it.
Wow.
You cannot separate it without breaking it apart. And I believe as we close tonight, we want to pray that the Lord binds our hearts together with a sense, especially those of us in the body of Christ, that we are honest about our hurt, our pain, our anger, our rage, whatever it is. Let's be honest, as my brother, and he loves the Lord. He's a preacher of the gospel. This man is anointed. So you don't dare judge my brother. He loves the Lord, and so does Karin, and I do as well. But if we can be honest, then we can get to the healing. God can't heal nothing that we don't acknowledge. We can't conquer anything that we keep concealing. So it's time to do truth speaking. Ephesians 4:15. We got to speak truth so we can move forward. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for this precious time. We thank you for allowing us this space, this moment in time to talk honestly and freely of an issue that needs to be spoken, like you told the Hebrews in Deuteronomy, in the bedroom, in the, when you sit, when you lie, we cannot be silent. We've been unmuted and we will not go back to be muted. We have been awakened and we will not go back to sleeping. God, I pray that all of us who watch this broadcast and will watch this broadcast will take away some of the ways we can walk in witness to that which our brothers and sisters are walking through. And that, God, even when it's not our own story, we can own it because we too know what it is to be marginalized in some way. So, Father, we bless our African brothers and sisters. We ask for those who have been oppressed for years, for those who have been marginalized, for those who have been stepped over, looked over, even when they have pushed through adversities to acquire, Lord God, so much in life that is not acknowledged. We just ask today that you would come by your power and break the shackles of racism, break the shackles of oppression, break the shackles, oh God, that is causing people to remain blind, causing people to ignore the pain, causing people to dismiss the pain. Father, let there be an awakening, or a greater awakening in America, that we don't have to wait for another death, Lord God. We don't have to see another senseless brutality, Father, to be awakened. But Father, we'd recognize the problem does exist. And Father, in honesty, we would confront it. So we ask for your help and we ask for your power to break through. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Amen. Bless you, my brother and sister. Thank
Bless you,
you for being
sisters.
here. I
Thank
love
you so
you
much.
both. I love you both. I love you both. I
Love you both too. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Good.
Good night.
All right.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.